Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for your patience this afternoon. We've had a few technical issues, but we are now all here for the Diverse Governance webcast series. And this afternoon, we have got our fourth conversation on the theme of diversifying governance. Today's question: what is the governing body's strategic role in delivering an inclusive education? We have got four fantastic speakers for you: Siraj Mayet, Magdalene Adenaki, Irfan Latif, and Lavinia Stennett. Magdalene is the CEO of a youth music charity, Vice Chair of Governors, and a safeguarding lead in her governing body. Irfan is the principal of DoD College London. He is one of three BAME head teachers of boarding schools in the country. He's also the governor of a prep school. And Siraj is the chair of a 5-school trust, and he works for a local authority as a project manager. Lavinia is a writer, activist, and the founder and CEO of the Black Curriculum. So welcome to the conversation. Each of our speakers will have 5 minutes to share their thoughts on this important question, and then we'll open it out to you, the audience. So please do put comments and questions into the chat. So over to you, Siraj, as our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Much appreciated. Hi, all. Really pleased to be with you this afternoon. I want to start off by talking about my sort of role as a chair of Batley Multi Academy Trust. As Hannah has mentioned, we've got 5 schools, 3 secondaries, and 2 primaries. And we've, over the years, particularly over the last year or so, we've had lots of conversation as a board of trustees in terms of taking a lead on some of those strategic conversations around inclusion and diversity in education. And we particularly looked at sort of 2 areas. The first one is around our vision and our ethos, and the other one is around accountability. And I know some of the other speakers will be going on to talk about some of the accountability sort of areas. So I want to focus more on the ethos and the vision. And basically, we've actually sort of made it sort of really a key priority to make sure that inclusion and diversity is very much at the heart of our vision and our ethos. And we want to make sure that our schools are able to take an active role in working with the community in terms of community cohesion, in terms of bringing people together, and really understanding that our role as educators is not just about what happens just within school. It's also about how we work with our communities, our parents, and making sure that we understand the people that we serve and bring that into our vision and our ethos as an organization. So just a couple of examples just to share with you in terms of what some of our schools sort of are doing as part of that ethos and vision around sort of working very closely with our communities. So our schools are very actively involved with the More in Common initiative of being sort of based in Batley. The Joe Cox Foundation is very much close to our heart, and they do some wonderful work around the events that they organise in terms of the great get together, the big iftar, the Batley Bake Off. Very much have our schools very much at the heart of those events and initiatives, because we understand that actually the more we understand, the more we talk to, more we work with our communities, we're able to do a better job of educating our students as a result of that understanding. So it's very much part of that sort of ethos and the way we look at sort of delivering our education offer. We also encourage our governors and trustees to be very much part of that process, working with our senior leaders to look at issues around diversity in partnership, and we very much see our governors and trustees being critical friends and being able to hold a mirror up to what's going on in our community and how that impacts on our school offer. So one of the things that we've done, we've had unconscious bias training for all our governors and our trustees, and we're rolling that program out to our staff as well. But we've made it very clear that we as governors and trustees need to lead by example. So this needs to start from us, and that commitment has to be there, and we have to take a wider viewpoint of education, and looking at how education works within that sort of bigger sort of picture sort of situation. So I mean, so very much, it's been sort of very much leading by example, from a trustee sort of governor sort of perspective, and then we've looked at how that then sort of relates to what we need to do to hold our executive to account. So we looked at equality impact assessments and targets, diversity targets in terms of our leadership structure, and things like having annual reports at our board meetings around recruitment, progression, and staff surveys. So those are some of the practical things that we've done, as well as our sort of broader picture around sort of inclusion very much being our vision and ethos. So it's very much, for us, it's very much about everybody playing their part, including governors and trustees. And bear in mind that governors and trustees come from, different walks of life. They have lots of lived experiences, and it's important that those lived experiences are used effectively to help schools to deliver an inclusive education offer. So, I mean, I think for me, those are the key sort of starting points in terms of looking at this from a strategic sort of perspective in terms of inclusion. I think that's probably my sort of starting point in terms of what I wanted to say. Hannah.
Thank you so much. You covered so much in 5 minutes, and I'm sure the audience will tease out lots of those points in a second. Magdalene, how about you? Like, what's your perspective on this question about the governance role in inclusive education?
Thank you so much, Hannah. Lovely to be here this afternoon, and hello to everyone that's watching right now, and all the replay listeners. So I think for just following on from what Siraj has said, I think from my school, my local school in Croydon, it's very much about the governors being that accountability partner, because my school, they've actually signed up for the Black curriculum. So they've got a team of teachers who are actually going on that training, which is fantastic. However, from the board level, from the governors level, it's very much about we having a representative from the team coming to obviously feed back to us on the board level, on the governors level, to kind of let us know what's going on. And so we are able to hold them to account at every single turning point as things are happening. And also the fact that for governors as well, it's important that we are also part of that team that are actually going for that training. So delegating a board member to be able to take the lead and be part of that inclusivity committee, and the whole discussion of the terminology of Black History Month, rather than keeping it to one particular month, which we celebrate in the UK in October, but looking at it, that is something that we have right through from January right through to December, but also looking at changing the name, because we acknowledge that when we talk about Black history, it may mean that we're particularly targeting one specific ethnic group, rather than all the other groups that are classed in a sense as under the BAME umbrella. So that for us is something that I would be taking back to my board and saying, okay, let's look at this in that kind of spectrum, because obviously they've got the committee, fantastic. So they've started that level, but designating a governor to be that lead to kind of have that discussion, that is important. But also once we take that on board, in my particular role being that parent governor, also looking at incorporating some parents who may want to be part of that discussion, and also the teachers as well, because obviously we've got the teachers there, but teachers working with parents to see how we can incorporate something that is running through, again, like I said earlier, from January right through to December.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Very succinct, and I think that segues beautifully into what Irfan would like to share about being the head teacher and a governor. Over to you, Irfan.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you everybody here giving up their time on a Thursday afternoon to join us here at this Diverse Governance podcast. It's a webcast, sorry. I'm going on from what Siraj and Magdalena have said. As Hannah has alluded, I am a head teacher as well, one of only 3 BAME head teachers running a boarding school in the UK. I'm also a governor of a prep school. And I think for me, it's all about culture. And that's a thread running through Siraj's and Magdalena's talk this afternoon. It's all about culture. Can I feel that culture when I walk through a school? And what are the values that underpin that culture? As a governor, I have every responsibility to ensure that that culture is reflected in those values. but more importantly, as a head, I too have got to embody that culture and those values, and ensure that my staff are also subscribing to those values and that culture. It's not a tick box exercise, but it's something that has to be cultivated over the course of a few years. It's not going to happen overnight, but that has got to come from your governing body. Without the support of your governing body, and I'm delighted to hear the work that Siraj and Magdalena are doing in order to inculcate those values of culture within their establishments. Every school needs to commit to turning their particular vision into that provision that they're providing at the school. Now, for us at school level, it's all about ensuring that we have an EDI staff lead. And for us, as this issue with the Black Lives Matter erupted, and I'm glad it did, it made us all look introvertly and to see what were we doing within our schools and what can we do in order for this to never happen again. So we appointed an EDI staff lead and to act as a conduit between the staff and senior management, and as a conduit to the governing body. There's an EDI rep on the governing body as well at our school, and our governing body now have looked at the processes involving EDI, from recruitment, from auditing processes, to ensure that that is inculcated throughout the whole of our schools. And I'm in a group of schools of about 20 odd. And so it's ensuring that all of those strategies are met. We've also appointed an EDI student lead. So part of our student council or prefect body, we have a student lead as well. And it's looking at how we can take the views of the students, the student voice, very, very important, and how that is communicated to the senior management level and, of course, to governor level as well. We have an EDI parent lead as well. How often is it that we send out communications which aren't inclusive? And that's something that we've reflected on. We are in a school where we have some 50 odd different nationalities who board and live and play and work at our school. So we need to be quite conscious of ensuring that we respect the needs of our international students and, of course, meet their needs as well in terms of communication. Siraj highlighted the need for training, both at governor level and at staff level. But we've also did the training at our student level as well. So we've had unconscious bias training within our student body as well. And that is then percolated through the different year groups. We've taken on board the Boarding Schools Association audit process so that we have within the governing body and within our senior management team a real proper EDI strategy, which looks at things like statement of intent. Does the rhetoric actually meet the reality? Looking at our leadership and looking at leadership of EDI at governor level, at student level, and at staff level. It's looking at an action plan. If we don't have those, what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to accomplish it? And what resources are we going to need? And how much it's going to cost? We look at the school environment. And it's great to hear that Magdalena School has taken on Lavinia's project and looking at the Black curriculum. When you walk into a school or your school, how inclusive does it feel? This month is LGBTQ History Month. Again, like Magdalena, why is it only in February? Why isn't it taught throughout the whole of the year? And so we've been looking at our school environment to make it more inclusive as well. The training is part and parcel now, and it's statutory for us that all staff have to do the training before they set foot into school in September. So that training is done over the summer. They can do that online, etc. But it's important that they've all done that and signed to say that they have completed that training. We then reflect on our practices and see where we can ensure that we improve our practices, whether it be on complaints, whether it be looking at the curriculum, whether it be looking at our pastoral structures to ensure that they reflect inclusivity. Our loos, for example, don't have disabled on them now, because in the past you had a disabled loo, and that's where you sent the children who were, for example, gender transitioning. They're not disabled, and they did not feel included. So we've made special arrangements now for those students to feel part and parcel of the school community and the school family. It's looking at the curriculum, and as Magdalena correctly highlighted, why is it only in October that we study Black History Month? And I'll let Lavinia talk more about that. And of course, it's about recruitment. Recruitment is so important. As Hannah said, I'm one of only 3 BAME head teachers running a boarding school in the UK. That's not good enough. And so we need to reach out to our communities and make sure that colleagues from those underrepresented minorities do apply for those jobs and remove the barriers that they feel are there or perceive to be there, to ensure that we get the right mix of diversity around the table. I think that's
a great place to end, Irfan. I love that statement, getting the right diversity around the table. Thank you so much. And I think the word belonging segues beautifully to Lavinia, thinking about how we create that sense of belonging in our schools and our culture, but also in our curriculum. So over to you, Lavinia.
Thank you, Hannah, and it's really lovely to hear from each of you and also be here to talk more about the Black curriculum and understand how we can embed diversity into governance. So the Black curriculum is an organisation that I established in 2019 that seeks to empower all students with a sense of identity through Black history all year round. So not only just in October, but making sure that it's embedded in the learning schemes of all young people from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 3. So when it comes to governance, I really want to focus on 3 specific areas because I noticed that boards sometimes and governance boards can be very static in terms of how they think about diversity and how diversity is actually something that is rather part of a culture, as has been mentioned, rather than something that is an add-on or an addition. So instead of seeing diversity as like a niche that somebody within a board represents or has to carry through the school culture, it's really important that every single staff member, whoever is on that board, has it as a prerequisite. So for example, before you even come in, there is a criteria that allows everybody to see that this is a priority area rather than somebody who is delegated with the position to go and take up diversity. Why is this important? Because it's key to make sure that diversity is something that is part of the conversation. It isn't just relegated to just one person. And again, it removes the onus and makes sure that it is a collective effort, because often times we see that when it comes to racism, there's one spokesperson or there's one person who's able to kind of take that up. But actually, if you want to make change, it has to include everybody. So I'd start at the board level and actually kind of think about the structures that's there first, and think about the ways in which we engage. Secondly, on that point, there is also a tendency to relegate training to something that is done every year or every so often. And rather, if we want these conversations to be more natural and change to happen, we need to make sure they're done more often in the form of a conversation that isn't just something that, again, we can like tick off and say, okay, look, this has been done, and we're on course to improving racism because it's not good enough. We need to make sure that it's an active part of the culture. So that's the kind of perspective that I have on boards and thinking about the structure and the framework of how we actually engage in these conversations. Secondly, I think Siraj picked up on this earlier, and also Magdalene, thinking specifically about including the voices of young people and the people in our communities, because we are all of diverse skill sets. We come in with different types of experiences and knowledge. And I think it's really important that in positions of power, we understand how that can be used effectively by engaging with people who are outside, who may have a specific type of knowledge or experience that is to do with curriculum or transforming learning and knowledge and pedagogies that we don't often come across. So I think it's really important that our power is used in specific ways that can elevate the voices of all, and especially the experiences of young people, and how that is fed through, and making sure that every so often there is that review and that engagement with young people. I know that sometimes boards do sometimes include the experiences of young people who may have graduated or left the school, and I think that's really, really key to have insights from people who are actually studying. So rather than looking to, for example, have someone who is just fresh out of college, thinking about how can we get the actual students' opinions into this as well, and not just through like forms and very static ways of looking at data, but getting their actual opinions verbally. And lastly, I want to touch on bringing in curriculum, so more of an input from everybody, thinking about curricular schemes of work, because what we have seen through the Black curriculum is that we work with senior leadership, and often because they are the leaders, they can also be the gatekeepers. So at what stage do governors get involved? At what stage do parents get involved? And I think it's really important that we reconsider the boundaries of how we work with senior leadership in school to make sure that all teachers have access to knowledge, tools, and confidence to be able to actually deliver the curriculum. And it isn't just a thing that is decided by the senior leadership or when the senior leadership is ready to do so. So I think it's really important that governors also act as a conduit between teachers and what young people are learning, and not just kind of leaving that up to senior leaders to decide. It's time we all get involved. I think we're doing a great job, but there's obviously so much more to do. So that's it from me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to all four of you. And there's some golden threads I'm going to begin to tease out now. So can I come back to you, Siraj and Magdalene, about this idea of critical friendship and the kind of the accountability partner role that the governor plays, but within EDI work in particular. Siraj, like, how do you position yourself as a critical friend in this space when you're a governor? Perhaps there might be some resistance from the school about the need to do this work.
Yeah, and I think it's based on building trust between sort of the executive and trustees or governors, and I think it's really important to develop a relationship to a point where you can have some honest, challenging conversation, perhaps in a safe environment to start off with, because until and unless we have those conversations, we're not really moving forward. Because sometimes, and I think we can talk about things and skirt around things, and you need to have those honest conversations. As others have mentioned, this is about changing a culture quite often. It doesn't happen overnight. There has to be those sort of relationships that have to be formed to be able to build those, to have those conversations, challenging conversations. And I think be mindful that actually there will be people, who may be resistant, because of lack of understanding or feel that it's not something that they need to necessarily engage. But it's finding ways to address that. So I think that the main sort of point for me is to be persistent and have a long-term goal. We're not going to change this overnight, but I think it's very easy to become disheartened and start sort of saying, well, we've done this before, it doesn't really make a difference, let's not sort of waste any more time on this. We have to see this through once and for all, and it's based on some honest dialogue that we need to have within a safe environment if needed to start off with.
Thank you, Siraj. And Magdalene, how do we move that criticality to accountability?
I think two things come to mind, and that's transparency and intent. Because if the discussions are not transparent and people are open about it, then we're just kind of ticking boxes. And also with that comes intentions. What exactly is the intentions of behind this whole thing? Are we just doing this because of the fact that we want to be seen as an organization that we are doing this, or we actually doing it because we actually care for the community in which we are serving, in a sense? So those are the two things. So it's about having those transparent discussions from the executive level to the governor's level to teachers, and obviously bringing in parents at some point as well. That must be open, because when you're transparent, there's that level of vulnerability as well, and people are able to pick up on that and are able to kind of say, okay, this person truly understands and talking from my point of view, and rather than them versus us kind of thing. And also having the intent very clear that this is what we're trying to do. This is the plan that we're putting in place. We're not trying to say something that's going to happen overnight, but we are trying to build a framework that we will put in place that we'll be working towards and working on for an X period of time. And so when we have those who need to be involved at the board level, governor's level, teachers and parents, when they're involved and they understand that this is what the school is doing and they're carried along, we're able to have that whole level of accountability, because then people know that, okay, we are on the same playing level field, and we're able to speak openly rather than having to feel that if I say something, I'm going to be criticized for what I've said.
Thank you, Magdalene. And Irfan, thinking about the two hats you wear, like you sit on both sides of the table, you sit as a head and you sit as a governor. I was thinking about how your experience of criticality and accountability when we come to diversity, equity and inclusion in schools.
I suppose I get it in both ears, really. I get it from my governing body, and I also have to give it to staff on the senior management, and ensure that the work that we need to be done is carried out. Yes, I've got to criticize. I've got to be critical. I've got to be critical of what I do, and so we constantly have surveys asking the students, asking the staff, asking the parents looking at what we're doing and evaluating whether our practices are fit for purpose to ensure that everyone feels inclusive. And then from a governing body level, it's looking at those processes and targeting and asking those uncomfortable questions to the SLT and seeing if they can, if they are ensuring that their school, that their culture meets the needs of all of their school population. It's a difficult one, and wearing two hats at times can be pressurized, but it is something that needs to be done. And asking those really uncomfortable questions, it's the time now, as Lavinia has said, it's something that we need to do. If we don't, and then we just continue as we are, and we're not going to make any progress at all.
And yeah, I think thinking about kind of accountability and criticality of culture compared to curriculum, you use the term, Lavinia, curriculum gatekeepers. And I'm just wondering about some of the conversations you've had with governors where perhaps they feel like the curriculum is the expertise of the school. And as governors, how do they hold people to account for curriculum when perhaps they're not teachers? Like, how do you navigate that kind of space around that conversation around the curriculum design in particular?
Sure, it's a very complex question, well, not question, but situation where there are experts, and school teachers are often the ones who are invested in teaching young people. So they would be the ones to actually say what they know in terms of making sure that the curriculum is shaped to making sure that young people are empowered and are knowledgeable and actually are receiving a quality education. So in some ways, the school teachers are the ones who are the experts, but then at the same time, you do also know that there are parents and community leaders who understand the importance of having a diverse curriculum, and it's thinking about how do we bridge those two levels of expertise, what knowledge is deemed or held and esteemed as valuable in the school. And I think it's really important that those questions are asked, and governing boards also consider those kind of questions too, because again, it's thinking about the structures and what's deemed normal, what's not. In cases where we see changes often slow to make, we understand that it's usually because people are uncomfortable with making those decisions about shifting power or shifting the way that things are done. So again, it comes back to having those very uncomfortable but very productive conversations about knowledge transfer and thinking about power and how that is relegated within the school realm as well.
So conversations has come up a lot. How do we create the space and the time and the conditions for these uncomfortable conversations to take place? Like, Irfan, any thoughts about, like, is it part of an agenda? Is it a separate meeting? How do you begin to unpack some of these things?
We all know, Hannah, how important safeguarding is. And we've seen what has happened back in the 70s when we were growing up. Well, when I was growing up, sorry, I'm not in any way alluding to your age. But when I was growing up, safeguarding wasn't as robust as it is now. And safeguarding now has become part and parcel of the conversation. It's become part and parcel of the agenda. It's the first thing the inspectorate look at. And so EDI needs to become part and parcel of that. And when you walk into a school, you know that school is good in terms of safeguarding. You need to be able to walk into a school and know that that school is good at EDI. And so it needs to become part and parcel of the conversation, the agenda, and the actual fabric of the school. And I go back to what Magdalena and Siraj said, it's all part of culture. And we've all changed our schools in terms of culture that reflects safeguarding needs. We've got to do that now for EDI.
It's such a good point. And Magdalena, I'll come to you as the safeguarding governor, because this has come up quite often about the fact that we need to see all the different isms and prejudice and discrimination as a safeguarding lapse. And actually, we need our young people to feel not only physically safe, but also psychologically safe, and our adults in our schools. How do you bring those conversations together? Have you had those conversations within your context where you're talking about safeguarding and diversity, equity, inclusion as one?
So we've had the discussion, obviously, of safeguarding, but in including the two of them together, that's something that I know that we haven't done, and that's something that I will be taking back, that we need to be having together, because the importance of it cannot be understated. The fact is, if we are going to be as a school and we know that the safeguarding of the kids are paramount, then obviously we need to also look at the diversity as well, because that's where many people are falling short, because many of them are being, many people can be prejudiced against because of that, and that can also lead to other issues. So those are discussions that I will definitely be taking back to the governors to say that we need to be including that discussion together. But on a general, those are discussions that should be, I would say that discussion, the diversity should kind of somewhat come under the umbrella of safeguarding, so that way it's not excluded when it's being spoken about.
Thank you, Magdalene. And thinking about safeguarding, so I'll come back to you and your reference to the kind of the fallout in your local community around Jo Cox's murder and death. And I heard her sister talk, and the work that's being done as a result of that is so powerful. But how do we learn from the things that have gone wrong? How do we bring that learning from society and the community into our schools to make sure that we're addressing it? Any thoughts on that, Siraj?
I think for me, I think in an ideal world, we shouldn't really have a distinction between education world and the rest of society. I think we need to sort of, come together, and what we do within schools has to be, in the context of what's happening in society. So I think first point for me is not to sort of think that those boundaries are there, because what happens in society happens in education. What we do in education affects our society as well. So it's a two-way thing. And I think we have to, as as educators, we have to sort of take our responsibility that actually, we're responsible, for what happens in our society moving forward. So I think we have a duty and a responsibility from that point of view in terms of doing our bit to make sure that we've got a better society moving forward. So I think that's the starting point. I think in terms of how we sort of learn from what's happening within our wider communities, and sort of look and bringing that into conversations that we have, whether it's at the governor sort of level or leadership level within schools or staffing level. I think we have to have those conversations. I think sometimes outside our professional work, we're prepared to have those conversations in a very honest and open way. But once we put our professional hats on, sometimes we forget that we can't just leave all of that behind. We have to sort of have those conversations within a professional capacity as well. So I think for me, it's also not being afraid to have those conversations and learning from what's around us. And actually, when things are not right, when things can be improved, it's also not being afraid to put your hand up and say, well, actually, that's something that we need to do better. We need to learn from. We need to invite other people into the conversation, into the dialogue, and we need to learn from other people. So I think it's having that sense of humility as well. We haven't got all the answers. The curriculum that we deliver is obviously there for a particular purpose. That doesn't mean that deals with everything that we need to deal with from a diversity and education perspective. So I think we have to be open to new ideas as well as feedback.
Thank you, Siraj. Can I come back to you, Lavinia, because your point about one training session per year is not enough. This needs to be an ongoing conversation. But even when you are having those training sessions, I imagine that you don't want to be stood there giving the knowledge and people just being passively kind of listening and learning. How do you frame that with the work that you and the team do around actually having those really vulnerable, courageous conversations about some of the changes we actually need?
So great question. We're in the midst of a pandemic, so I feel like it makes it even more difficult to have those conversations in ways that just transfer knowledge and also the sense of comfort, because in difficult conversations, you really do want to be able to lean in on somebody and understand different perspectives without feeling like you're on the spot or being challenged. And I think if you're in a rectangle online, it can often look like something is just directed straight at you. In a normal situation, we would really kind of try to separate the different types of leaderships within the school, because we understand that even if you have a school-wide training, there's still going to be power imbalances. So there might be teachers who are there with their senior leaders or vice versa, and there is a sense of power, and with that there is feelings of uncomfort or discomfort, sorry, that bring on a reluctance to actually say what the problem is. And so I think within that is really trying to separate or come to a balance where people can actually feel comfortable with their peers, be honest, but also feel like they can actually engage and challenge as well in a healthy way. So we set obviously very clear ground rules. But at the same time, there is also an acknowledgement of that this won't be solved in one day. So we don't ever promise that by you coming to this training, it's going to solve all your problems. There is an understanding that this is an ongoing work, and we support schools and teachers in making sure that over time, over the space of a term, and even thinking about a year down the line, what progress has been made individually and also as a cohort, because everybody is accountable in that space. But within that space, we have to acknowledge that there's different people at different levels, and yeah, that if it's not recognized, then it can also reproduce the same things we're trying to break down.
I think that's such a key point about actually that, going back to Irfan's point about the introspection, the looking inwards, and actually just diving in with unconscious bias training or conversation around diversity, actually without thinking about the power hierarchy or the culture of the organisation and thinking about the best place to frame that. I think it's so key. And a comment's just come in, a question, sorry, about how do we enable these professional conversations to take place? So you made the point about we perhaps have these conversations more in our personal spheres, our social spheres, and we do in our professional spheres. So how do we find that courage? And I'm going to ask each of that question, the courage to speak up in a professional sense. So Magdalene, where do you get that impetus from to have these courageous conversations?
I think it needs to start from the hierarchy. So we're looking at board level, we're looking at governors level, and then obviously from governors, it has to be filtered down. And so, again, I've been saying one of the things I'm going to be taking away from today is making sure that there's that level of openness and transparency with the team, because the team should be able and comfortable to be able to meet their supervisors, their head, to be able to say, this is the issue. So it definitely has to be a discussion that we will be having at our next governors meeting to say, okay, what are the procedures in place that if any of the teachers needed to speak about something, what will happen? And can we have a designated person that will be obviously that they can come back to speak to, and then that person will obviously come back to the board whenever we have our next governors meeting and refer back to us. So those are things that I believe should be discussed and will be discussed at our next governors meeting.
And can I just come back about being the parent governor? How do you surface or kind of distill the parent voice, the parent feedback back to the governing body in your role?
It's definitely, again, with a primary school, you always think of that whole parents in the playground, because you don't get that in secondary school. So the parents know, and the school is so good in the sense that when they've actually gotten a governor, they circulate it around so everyone knows who this governor is. And so being there in that presence, being open and talking to everybody, and people tend to go, it's just something that happens organically, and people just begin to come to you and say, okay, this is the issue, because I've had that several times, and this is the issue, can you please present it at your next governor's level? So being a parent myself, being there in that school playground to pick up the child from school, having that discussions is always something that is open, and something that is something that is invaluable, that you cannot put a price to or put a sense of value to, because it's a case that it's open, the parents trust you, you're a parent yourself, you're there, you're present, we're in the same space together.
Thank you. And Siraj, I'm imagining you're having these conversations in your day job and in your governing role, because it's kind of like you're showing up in different spaces there. But how do you create those conditions for everybody to be empowered to have the courage to speak out? Because we need everybody to be involved in these conversations, don't we? Any thoughts on that, Siraj?
I think probably three things. I think we need people to recognise, first of all, that there is a problem, there is an issue. So I think there's something about not being in denial, and I think we just need to be upfront about that. And I think having that out there is quite helpful. The other thing is that I think sometimes people are afraid of having conversations, or because of the fear of saying the wrong thing or using the wrong terminology, and sometimes I think that stifles conversation, and the upshot of that is that people don't have the conversation at all, and I think that's probably the worst case scenario. So I think it's about sort of giving people almost the the permission to have those conversations, and unfortunately, that is what's needed sometimes. And I think it's also important that people who may be perhaps feeling that they've never been affected by prejudice or discrimination of any form, to also step up and speak out. And this thing about allyship is really important, because I think we're really moving forward when people who feel haven't been affected by prejudice, are prepared to come forward and say it's wrong, and prepared to say that we need to do something about it. And that's when we're really moving forward. I think things that have happened since last year, the conversations around the impact of COVID, the Black Lives sort of movement, some of those conversations have started to come through. There's still a long way to go. Those conversations need to be amplified, and I think we're in a good space and it's a good opportunity. I guess my slight concern is that sometimes these things go in cycles. You get an event or sort of situation where lots of people are interested in that subject, and then over time it starts to sort of filter out. And I think what we really need is for those conversations that we've started to have over the last few months or so to actually keep on having momentum, and we need to see through these conversations to a point where we're actually getting real sort of changes as a result of this. It's more than just a conversation. We need action at the end of it, but we do need to have those conversations as a starting point.
So such a good point, Siraj, and I'll come to you, Lavinia, about how we keep the momentum going. Like, we shouldn't need a high-profile murder to trigger schools suddenly diversifying their curriculum. I know in the autumn term there was a lot of noise about diversifying the curriculum, but it's already gone a bit quieter on social media. Maybe people are busy doing it, but there's other priorities. Like, how are you encouraging schools to have a long-term vision and goal for this, and how to perhaps create those milestones for how we do this over time to have sustained change in our schools?
Thanks. Siraj made a really good point about it being recognised. So if it's not, if it's not clearly a problem that people understand and also admit to, it's going to be very hard for people to recognise that there needs to be a long-term change. And what I mean by that is not just leadership or whoever is in charge of whatever in the school just saying, yes, we understand the importance of Black Lives Matter. Why? What impact does that have in your school? And I think understanding it in terms of its proximity to whatever you're leading on, whichever young people are in your within your environment, understanding the impact that it has on them is key before we actually start to move into ways of actually changing the problem. I think it goes back to the idea that we can't actually make change if there is an admission of something that is wrong. So I'd say that needs to absolutely be part of it. And then thinking more broadly about what does change actually look like? So is it just a conversation? Or is it just having a couple of examples of Black history on the syllabus? I think it's really important for schools to be very clear about what the outcome looks like and what sense of, for us, it's building that sense of identity. What is the purpose, the goal? What's the ultimate vision? And I think if there is a lack of that there, then there's not going to be any kind of progress made, really. So I think it's really important that there is a clear kind of goal and a strategy put in place to actually show how that goal is going to be accomplished. But yes, without a recognition of the problem first in all its entirety, it's very unlikely change is going to be made.
Thank you, Lavinia. And coming back to you, Irfan, there's got a few comments and questions coming through about the different ways we can structure the EDI, DEI in our schools. Could you just speak a little bit more about how you went around building this DEI team of the named governor, the named leader, the named teacher, the named parent, the named student, and how those groups perhaps coexist or co-create that strategy?
Yes, it's again, going back to what all my colleagues have said on this panel, it's all about culture. It's all about culture. The fact that people can't have those courageous conversations must lead you to believe that you don't have an inclusive culture at your place. Ours is very open. We have open door policy, deputy heads, senior leaders. All of us have open door policies so that people can come and talk to us about any of those issues. We promote, anti-racism. We look at BAME, we look at Black history, we look at Asian history. it's really, really important for us to ensure that everybody feels included. LGBTQ, race, religion, everything. And that's why I love what I'm doing now, because I'm learning so much. We are going to get it wrong. You know, let's not be afraid that we will get it wrong, and we probably will be clumsy as well at the same time. But we felt it was it was important anyway to have that representation at those three levels: the governor level, the student level, and the staffing level, and how each of those work together. And so that strategy has been built around using our toolkit, which are about the statement of intent, the action plans, the policies and procedures, and looking reflectively of what we are doing as a school in order to promote those qualities of inclusion and diversity. Everyone needs to buy into that. And it's not a case of, as Lavinia has correctly said, it's not a case of just having a one-day training session. It's got to be throughout. Now, I go back to the comparison we made to safeguarding. Well-being is huge at our school, absolutely huge. We never talked about well-being 3, 4, 5 years ago. Now, mental health first aid is about 60 of our staff are mental health first aid trained. This week is Children's Mental Health Week. Every week should be Children's Mental Health Week. So for us, mental health now is top of the agenda. For us, exam results, we've removed ourselves from the exam league tables. Exam results will come if our children are happy. And we're going to see when children come back to school, and I hope that is sooner rather than later, there is going to be an issue, if you like, of mental health. And how do we go about tackling mental health? And so to ensure that we've got those provisions in place to allow mental health to be openly discussed has got to be the same for EDI, where people can have those courageous conversations and feel that they're not going to be discriminated or persecuted against because they've brought up a particular issue within their school that they're not happy about.
I think it's a really good point. And there's a couple of comments about diversity being more than race. Yes, absolutely. There are 9 protected characteristics, and we are thinking about all 9. But thinking about mental health and wellbeing and diversity, equity, inclusion, and the intersect between those two spaces, I think is really important too, because research shows that if you have a protected characteristic, you're more likely to suffer from mental health issues. So actually, as a system, as a society at the moment, there should be 2 things we care about deeply, but let's not think about them as being separate. Let's actually think about how we integrate them into one strategy. And if we could just give some examples of some concrete actions, some of the practical and policy-based things we can do. Siraj, could you speak a little bit about the equality impact assessments? We mentioned that in our briefing meeting, but would you mind just talking about that to the audience?
Yeah, certainly. So I think what we've introduced is the equality impact assessment. So when we review policies, procedures, we need to look at the impact it would have in terms of the changes on our protected characteristics groups, and I think we need to go through that process of thinking through that impact, and actually going through a process, logging that, putting it down on writing, because sometimes I think if we don't go through that whole process, you can very easily say, well, actually, we've changed something here. We don't think it's going to have an impact on anybody in particular. It's going to be, fairly equal in terms of how it's going to impact in terms of different groups. And it's really important that we have that discipline, that structure, to be able to look at, what we're sort of introducing in terms of new policies or structures or things, within a school setting, and then and being able to fully recognize and appreciate and document the impact it's likely to have on certain groups, protected characteristic groups. And if we feel that it's going to have an adverse effect, then we need to have a plan in terms of mitigating that. And I think it's really important that that we have a discipline and a structure, and a bit like Irfan sort of pointed around safeguarding. We've got lots of policies and procedures in place, and sometimes that can take a lot of time, but actually that's all part of that culture to say that this is important. We're not going to leave anything to chance, and these are the procedures to back it up. And I think we probably need a systematic approach around diversity issues, for those reasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely, a systematic approach. And Magdalene, if I can come to you, I know governors and trustees spend a long time ratifying policies. I've been there. There's a lot of policies to ratify in a school. So which policies should the people listening today really be looking at and giving their attention to perhaps be that critical friend and that accountability measure around EDI and the school's policies?
I think we've been mentioning this word. We've all been talking about it, and we've been talking using the word culture, and that's something that's very powerful, because when you come to a school and you look at a school setting, it's a group of people coming from different background, different thinking, different beliefs, different values. When we think about all of those things, how important is that to an individual, and how does that individual live their life in regards to the culture of their kind of like their backgrounds and the way things are done? So I think for me personally, I think the one thing that I would say, it's about looking at the incorporation of the understanding of culture and how it impacts people and how it directs their lives, and how the school can incorporate it from all the various levels, and also ensuring that the parents, who are also valuable members of the school community, are part of that discussion. That for me is something that needs to be introduced. So it's not just like Lavinia said about the one-day training. No, it's something that we should be looking at, maybe, yes, training the school team, but also bringing on board parents as well to be part of that discussion, if not necessarily part of that official training, but at least part of that discussion. And IFAN has done as well with their student board, incorporating the young people as well, the kids inside of there, because everybody has a valuable contribution. So for me, I would say culture in regards to when you're looking at the diversity and just understanding what that really means, and then looking at how we then able to kind of ensure that we diversify. Going back to what I said at my introduction about changing that terminology from Black History Month, from that terminology from October, but also incorporating it as a year-long celebration. I call it celebration rather than marking. Let's look at understanding every single person's culture that comes from that same background, and just kind of incorporating it into the way we do things, because that is the culture of the school or the environment. It's the way we do things, and having an understanding and appreciation of everybody else's values and opinions.
Thank you, Magdalene. And Irfan, if I could ask you the same question, how do we codify culture? How do we add a procedure, process to culture, and how does that get reflected in our policies? I think I froze then. Irfan, are you happy to take that question?
Just say that again. There seemed to be a bit of drop out there. Sorry.
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi froze for a second. How do we codify culture? How do we capture culture in a policy or procedure so that then the governors can hold people to account, what that looks and feels like in a school context?
It's difficult to put it in writing, because it is something to do with behaviour. It's to do with how we are perceived as senior leaders, as governors, amongst the school community, and how we act, what we wear, what we say, what we do, how we eat, how we are on social media. All those sort of things has an impact on what the school, what the governing body look like. So difficult to ensure that you can have a policy on culture and you need to follow this and this in terms of culture, but it's about behaviour. And I think that's what it is. It's about ensuring that those behaviours are underpinned by the values of the school or of the institution. And I said, our values are tolerance and respect and kindness. And how is that seen? And how is that reflected in our behaviour policy? How is that affected in our curriculum? How are those values reflected in all of those policies, even included in our recruitment policy? How do we go about ensuring that there is a level of tolerance and respect and kindness within our recruitment policy? Difficult to have like I said, a policy on culture, but it's making sure that those behaviours are reflected in what we do in those procedures and policies throughout the school.
Thank you, Irfan. And my final question to you, Lavinia, thinking about the time and the energy and the resource that diversifying a curriculum is going to take, and it's practice, isn't it? It's over time. But how can we then ensure that the scheme of work might be diverse, but how do we make sure that the delivery of the scheme of work and the kind of the pedagogical approach is also having that attention? I fear that people are just diversifying the imagery on their PowerPoints and putting in some diversity into their schemes of work. How do you broach that, Lavinia?
I'm not sure we have long enough to get into that, but I feel like it's a really, really good question. And it's very important because, yes, young people also receive as much information as much as the delivery, and actually how engaged they feel by that, and also how language is used in that as well. And I think, for example, a good way of approaching this from a practical point of view is to assess language. Language is a carrier of culture. It shows where we're at. It shows how we're thinking and how we respect other people. So in our workplace, we don't use the word BAME because we're not a monolith. Like, we're so different. We come from like completely different cultures. And under the banner of Britain, we're treated under the banner of racism, which makes that a defining part of our experience. And so we say that whilst we are people of many colors, including white people, there are specific differences within that. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And as part of our language policy, if you like, we don't advocate for the word BAME. Also coming on to this idea of tolerance, what are we tolerating? The mere fact of difference. So it's really thinking about what kind of standard is it that we want to set for our future, for our young people, and how does language adapt to that? Because like everything, it has to grow, it has to be challenged and changed at some point. And so language is a really key part of that actual delivery, if you like, of decolonizing the curriculum. So yeah.
That's a very succinct answer. Well done. So thinking about culture, thinking about the behaviours within the culture, and thinking about the language we use about those behaviours and within the culture too. So I'm going to ask each of you to sum up in one sentence your key message or your key takeaway for the listeners today. So I'll go in the same order as you inputted at the start of the session. So Siraj, what's your one takeaway for the audience?
I think for me, we're going to keep on moving ahead with this. It's important that we don't stop.
Thank you. Magdalene, what's your one key takeaway?
My one key takeaway is accountability. We need to be accountable for everything that we do, and people should feel comfortable to be able to come to us at any point in time.
Thank you, Magdalene. And Irfan, what's your one key takeaway? Is he frozen? Have I frozen? I think he's frozen. Okay, I'll come to you, Lavinia. What's your key takeaway?
I had a bit of time to think, so thanks. I'd say that the one key takeaway is unity. So we're all in this together, yeah.
Let's see whether Irfan's going to come back to life in a few seconds. Whilst we're waiting for him to come back to life, I just want to apologise again and thank you all for your patience at the start of the webcast this afternoon. We're very sorry for the technical issues. The live broadcast will be recorded and will be on our YouTube. This was the 4th of 6 conversations enabled by our 5 partners. Quick shout out to our partners: Agbis, Governors for Schools, Inspiring Governance, NGA and New Schools Network. Thank you for collaborating on this series of conversations. And we have got 2 more webcasts left. So we have got a webcast after half term, thinking about why non-teachers should become governors and bring that diversity of lived experience to our schools. And then the 6th one, the final one, is about why diverse school teachers and school leaders should go and be a governor in a different school. Irfan, welcome back. You can have the final words of today's webcast. What's your one key takeaway for the audience?
The culture.
One word takeaway, Irfan. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. So thank you so much to our 4 speakers this afternoon. You've been brilliant. I've really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you for gifting your time to us. And please do get in touch on our various social media. Thank you very much for listening.